Thank you, Mr. President. So we are having yet another European summit. I make it the 22nd that we've had in the last 2.5 years. Mr. Verhofstadt said it was the 18th, but it wouldn't be the first time that he's got his numbers wrong. I don't know what else Herman Van Rompuy has done, but he's certainly been very good at calling summits. None of the others have made any material difference. So why, we ask ourselves, should this one? And the reason that they've all so far failed is because none of them have addressed the real problem, which of course is the collapse of European competitiveness. Now we all, I think, in this House have a common objective. We all, of course, want to see the old mantra of growth and jobs. Yet we have very different views on how that should be achieved. For the Socialists across several groups in this House, only more government spending can create growth. I fundamentally disagree. The Socialist vision of growth is an illusion created at the expense of borrowing and tax rises, and it is totally irresponsible in the current climate. As my favourite politician, Margaret Thatcher, once said, the problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of everybody else's money. We cannot afford a return to the discredited socialist growth agenda of Keynesianism dressed up as more investment. Economic growth does not need state intervention. In fact, very often state intervention actually restricts growth. Take, for example, the Agency Workers Directive. This well-meaning piece of legislation introduced through this House has resulted in a fall in the number of temporary workers being employed in France. The Working Time Directive actually stops people from working. In a crisis, it is utterly immoral. So-called social protection legislation in the EU is failing to protect us from the worst social injustice of all, which is unemployment. We risk having the best protected workforce in the world, but no workers. More flexible labour markets are the way forward. EU leaders should ask which employment directives they can repeal immediately. And we also need, as others have said, a bonfire of red tape. Each piece of additional legislation acts like a pin in the body of our economy. It can survive a few, but eventually it will be killed by 1,000 pinpricks. The Commission's inertia-driven better regulation agenda should be replaced by a politically driven deregulation agenda. And this Parliament can play a role here in that by spending more of our time looking at how we can repeal, refine and reform existing measures. Mr. President, the EU needs to do less and it needs to do it better. Now, I have talked about what we can do less. What can we do better? Commissioners, the answer lies in the letter signed by 12 heads of government. They sent you a clear set of ideas for extending the single market, for pursuing free trade agreements, a European research area, no end of good proposals. The reaction, sadly, from Presidents Barroso and Van Rompuy was disappointing. They continue to fall back on the EU 2020 agenda. And that agenda is lacking because it tries to be all things to all men. It contains some things to appeal to a liberal conservative like me. It has parts to appeal to socialists like Mr Swoboda, even parts to appeal to a social democrat like Mr Verhofstadt. There are probably no parts that appeal to Nigel Farage, but there again, the Commission are not miracle workers. 2020 will not work unless it learns the lessons of the failed Lisbon strategy, because it did not achieve its primary goal. So my message to the Commission is this. We need a strong, free trade, pro-competition agenda from you. At the moment, the Commission is effectively rudderless. The letter showed you the way forward, and yet you disregarded it. The reform that the EU needs will not come about from one additional dinner, but tomorrow's meeting can make an important start. It should give the Commission a clear message that it wants to see a free trade, deregulatory and pro-market agenda. It should tell the Commission to go away and rethink the next 7-year budget so that every euro focuses on added value outputs rather than simply increasing national contribution inputs. Most importantly, it should place the single market at the heart of our economic recovery. Unless we resolve our competitiveness crisis, we will never resolve all of the many other crises facing the EU. How many more dinners and summits will it take before we actually get some action that will make a difference? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Mr. Callanan. Mr. Callanan, if you could put your headphones on. Your remarks led to a whole string of reactions. I have a series of requests of questions to you. First, Mr. Lambert.
Mr. Callanan, I have a hard time taking lectures on competitiveness from the UK, and especially from British Conservatives. My friend, if I am looking at the pile of debt that exists in Europe, I see that British debt, public and private debt combined, amount to 500% of GDP, right? And this is the result of deregulation and basically of the recipes that you are lecturing all of us to adopt. And the result of that is that the British taxpayer was taxed to the tune of several hundreds of billions of pounds to rescue a financial sector gone adrift through your deregulation. So sorry, but your lectures, I've had them.
Well, I'm not sure that Mr. Lambert's figures are correct, but it is certainly true that the UK has a very high debt legacy. It was caused by a socialist Labour government. It was caused by too much spending. Thankfully, in the UK, we now have a government that is actually taking some action to bring the deficit down. But I am afraid the problem lies over to your left, Mr. Lambert. Talk to the socialists. They created the problem. The government which I support is helping to clear up that problem.